Hello everyone. Our topic today was requested by SLR409, Aurelia de Primus, and Nakora. We'll be going over the eponymous Sly Cooper of the Sly Cooper franchise. Spoilers for the entire series. Lydia.
Okay, so Sly Cooper is the main character in the Sly Cooper games, books, and comics. The Cooperverse takes place on an alternate Earth that is populated by anthropomorphic animal people. Sly himself is a raccoon and a professional thief, the last in a long line of master thieves, a fact that drives nearly every major plot point in the series. Sly and his buddies are characterized as kind of modern-day Robin Hood-like figures, in that they steal almost exclusively from other criminals rather than from the common man. What they do with these ill-gotten gains is rarely discussed, though on one particular heist of some high-end chocolate, they just ate it. But in Sly's words, there's no honor, no challenge, no fun in stealing from ordinary people. To steal from fellow crooks, fellow masterminds, is to prove that you are yourself a master thief. Sly Cooper is a fast-talking, wisecracking, devious, highly skilled, and highly acrobatic burglar with a heart of knockoff gold. He is charming and quick on his feet and combines natural athleticism with experience and skills passed down by generations of fellow thieves to become one of the world's best criminals. Sly is joined in his efforts by his two best friends, Bentley and Murray. Bentley is a turtle and the brains of their outfit, acting as the group's guy in the chair, literally by the last half of the game series. He handles most of their pre-planning and creates the vast majority of the gang's gadgetry. Murray is the heart of the group, acting as their heavy muscle and an expert getaway driver. No fictional crime dynamic would be complete, though, without some kind of lawman constantly hunting the group down. In the Cooper Gang's case, that person is Inspector Carmelita Fox, one of Interpol's top agents. She relentlessly hunts down Sly and his buddies while trying to stifle her feelings of attraction for Sly and her admiration of the gang's overall skill. A task made difficult by Sly's constant, blatant, and genuine flirtations with her while he tries to avoid capture.
Before we get to Sly's story, we need to talk a bit about his family lineage. The Cooper line goes back to the literal Stone Age, and members of his clan have spanned the globe. Thousands of years ago, one member of their family began writing the Thievius Raccoonus. Did we mention this is a very cartoonish game? A tome that was a combination of memoirs of the various Cooper's exploits, as well as an instruction manual for the various techniques and skills the Coopers developed over the years as master thieves. The book was passed down from one generation to the next, the knowledge and skills within growing over time, such that successive generations of Coopers could more easily become better and better thieves. All, it should be noted, with that same code of robbing from other crooks, because doing so is simultaneously more morally satisfying and took a greater degree of skill than robbing normies. As the ages passed, the Coopers developed a reputation, at least in the criminal underworld, as some of the globe's premier thieves. Sometime in the distant past, the Coopers earned the ire of a bird, who by the modern day goes by the name Clockwork. We don't know when they pissed him off, but we know that he had marked the Coopers as his enemies by the time the Thievius Raccoonus was first written. Clockwork hated the Coopers. He dedicated his life to ruining them and exceeding their reputation as the world's best thief. Oddly, no mention is ever made of him trying to outdo any of the Coopers in feats of larceny. Rather, he seems to have hunted, and harassed the family for generations, which he managed to do by constructing an entirely mechanical body for himself, which was literally fueled by his hatred of the Coopers. Housed in this effectively immortal shell, his machinery never corroding or breaking down thanks to the hate chip, which repaired any system so long as he continued to load the Coopers, Clockwork hounded the Cooper family for thousands of years. How he first constructed such a body, literal millennia before anything vaguely resembling that level of technology was available to anyone else, is unknown.
Sly was born in 1984, and for the first 8 years of his life he was raised by his mother and father, fully aware of his family's legacy, the fact that his father was an adept thief, and that Sly was expected to follow in the family's footsteps. However, sometime around the age of 8, Clockwork, along with 4 other criminals dubbed the Fiendish Five, a team seemingly assembled solely for this purpose, broke into the Cooper's home and murdered Sly's parents before stealing the Thievius Raccoonus. The book was divided up between the 5 crooks, each taking some of the Cooper family's secrets, and then the Fiendish Five split up and went back to their own criminal exploits, aided now by the expert knowledge of previous generations of Coopers. Sly was specifically left alive because Clockwork intended to prove that the Coopers were nothing without their book, presuming Sly's future criminal exploits would end in failure, though Sly wouldn't learn this for many years. Sly was shipped off to an orphanage where he met Bentley and Murray. The trio became fast friends and even staged their first caper while still living there, performing a heist of the headmistress's cookie jar, which she selfishly kept for herself despite the cookies being a Christmas gift for the orphans. The first game picks up 10 years later. During that time, Sly and the gang honed their skills, became world-renowned thieves in their own right, notably without access to the Thievius Raccoonus. It was during these years that they first encountered Carmelita, who, despite closing cases, catching criminals, and shutting down crime rings left and right, always seemed to be one step behind the Cooper gang when they crossed paths. Sly would actually end up catching the very crook who'd first stolen the valuables Sly himself had come to obtain, delivering both into Carmelita's hands, complete with his calling card, a raccoon face with a pageboy cap, as some kind of peace offering or a criminal's brand of flowers. In the years and games that followed, that would not be the last time Sly would fudge plans a bit to try and warm Carmelita's opinion towards him.
The first game, Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, picks up 10 years after Sly was orphaned, with Sly stealing Carmelita's Interpol file on both he and the Fiendish Five, finally giving the Cooper gang workable information to go on in tracking down the murderers of Sly's parents. The plan was to take back the pieces of the Cooper family book and get some form of revenge, likely in the flavor of stealing their most valuable stuff, a task that Bentley and Murray were 100% in on. The trio traveled the globe, tracking down each member of the Fiendish Five. Each time, they ruined one of the Five's plans, sending whatever criminal operations they had going into total disarray, before absconding with one of the pieces of the Thievius Raccoonus and moving on to the next member. Carmelita spends the game hot on the Cooper gang's trail, never quite catching up to them, but because she spends the game tracking them so closely, she always shows up in time to arrest the defeated members of the Five, along with most of their various crime rings. Finally, the Thievius Raccoon is fully reconstructed, and, armed with many of the skills of his ancestors, Sly and company track Clockwork to his volcano lair. This time, Carmelita arrived first, infiltrating Clockwork's lair in the hopes of both catching him and then laying a trap for the Cooper gang. Instead, she is caught and used as bait to lure Sly. The plan almost works, with Sly coming to Carmelita's aid when he finds her locked up, only to have the room locked behind him and flooded with poison gas. Only the quick thinking and computer skills of Bentley saved Sly's life.
Afterwards, Sly and Carmelita come to a temporary truce, agreeing to take down Clockwork before picking up their chase. Working together, Sly and Carmelita kill Clockwork, dropping his metal body into the molten lava of the volcano. Maybe don't have your big bad base in a volcano. He would be immortal. Other than that, like freaking, oh, I recharge no matter what damage happens to me. Oh, what if we keep damaging you? Like every second you recharge, you also take damage. Once they're sure he's done, Carmelita informs Sly that she's going to give him a 10-second head start, as they'd agreed before taking on Clockwork. Instead of running, Sly spent the 10 seconds making eyes at her before sneaking a kiss at the last second, using her surprise and the distraction of the kiss to handcuff her to the rails before taking off. Sometime later, Carmelita and the gang would cross paths once more during a wedding celebration. A criminal named Dimitri was marrying a wealthy socialite to make a grab for her money. Sly and the group showed up to steal a work of art while everyone was busy with the wedding. Carmelita was there to protect said piece of art. When Sly arrived, he accidentally stumbled upon both Dimitri's forgery operation and his guards. The gang took out all the guards and then disguised themselves as said guards and informed Carmelita that they'd apprehended Sly, directing her to the forgery operation and away from their prize. They made off with the art before Carmelita realized what had happened, and she called the forgery ring in while chasing down the gang. Because of all the complications with the forgery ring, they were behind schedule, meaning they had a long wait for a safe exit window. So, Sly sent his buddies with the loot to wait while he intercepted Carmelita on a bridge, disarming her and managing to banter/argue back and forth around her weapon for long enough to let their escape route open up, hopping off the bridge onto a boat with his buddies when the time came.
2 years after Clockwork was dropped into the volcano, Cairo's Museum of Natural History recovered Clockwork's components, magnificently intact despite all they'd been through, and announced a plan for the Clockwork Restoration Project. Sly and the gang, fearful that reassembling Clockwork would return him to life, immediately set out to steal all of his parts, only to be beaten to the punch by the Claw Gang. When Sly and the gang arrived in the museum, they found Carmelita waiting for them, along with a new partner, assigned to her on this mission as a favor to one of Interpol's prison wardens. Unbeknownst to even the other Claw members, Carmelita's partner and the Claw's boss had a secondary plan. The Claw's boss wanted to take Clockwork's immortality for himself. He'd studied Clockwork, knew that his mechanical body was fueled by hatred, and he'd come up with a plan. He would reforge Clockwork's chassis and then use a combination of illegal drugs and hypnotism to cause an entire city to drown in hatred, then use that as a catalyst to fuse himself into Clockwork's body and jumpstart it, granting the Claw's boss immortality just like Clockwork had had. In order for the plan to work, each of the Claw Gang's members had something to contribute. However, each of them was also gifted a piece of Clockwork's body to fuel their own criminal empire as part of the payment for the heist, so their boss needed a way to get them back. To that end, he planted Carmelita's new partner in Interpol, using her to guide Sly and the gang after the various Claw members, knowing they would collect all the pieces for him.
While maintaining her cover as an Interpol agent, once Sly and the gang had done most of the work for them, Carmelita's partner framed Sly, the gang, and Carmelita, the Cooper gang, for the heist of the Clockwork materials, and Carmelita for working with the Cooper gang. Bentley managed to escape capture, but the rest of them, Carmelita included, were turned over to the Claw gang warden, who intended to brainwash them all for various purposes. Before that could happen, though, Bentley sprung his friends, who then chased the Claw warden down to her own base of operations and freed Carmelita of a similar fate. Carmelita and the gang worked together on and off again for the rest of the game, with Carmelita stubbornly trying to bring Sly's crew in for the sake of justice, while also admitting that they were all working toward the same goal of stopping the Claw gang. All while also trying to clear her own name. Events culminate in the Claw boss assembling Clockwork's body and enacting his plan, only to have Carmelita's partner kill him and take Clockwork's immortality for herself. What follows is an aerial chase through the skies over Paris with Sly, his friends, and Carmelita battling the giant metal bird. Eventually, they cause the machine to collapse, and recognizing that the hate chip was the secret to its immortality, aimed to destroy it. Murray pried apart Clockwork's mouth, and Bentley clambered inside to remove the chip, only to have the giant metal jaws of the bird collapse, paralyzing Bentley from the waist down. He was safely pulled from the wreckage, and Carmelita destroyed the chip. With the crisis over, she informed the Cooper gang that she had to turn them in. Seeing the state of injury, both psychological and physical, that his friends were in, Sly offered to turn himself in without a fight, if Carmelita let the other two go. She agreed, and his friends disappeared into the night. With Sly in custody, Carmelita was both reinstated as an Interpol agent and also promoted. They then boarded a chopper for transport to see Sly incarcerated. Unbeknownst to either of them, Bentley and Murray had removed the pilot and jury-rigged the chopper to fly in slow circles. How it got off the ground is never discussed.
As such, after a lengthy, uncomfortable silence, when Sly and Carmelita finally started talking, they just never really stopped. They sat in that chopper, chatting, opening up, comparing notes about life, sharing wants and dreams, getting about as close to a date as the two were ever likely to get. They were so engrossed in each other's company that it took them about 2 hours to realize that what should have been a short flight was still going. While Carmelita went up front to see what was wrong, Sly hopped out of the chopper and escaped. The following months were a tough time for Sly's gang. Bentley spent an indeterminate period of time in a hospital, but once it became clear he'd never walk again, Sly and Murray brought him home, where he immediately began working on a souped-up wheelchair. Murray blamed himself for everyone getting hurt, specifically Bentley, and left the group to go find and recenter himself spiritually. After he'd been gone a while, Sly and Bentley uncovered the location of the Cooper Vault, a vault hidden on an island that was supposed to be where the Coopers kept their greatest riches, both to show off to future generations and in case they were ever needed. The two decided to visit the vault, only to arrive at the island to find that it had been locked down by someone they eventually discovered was one of Sly's father's old crew, who wanted access to the vault's treasures for himself and didn't think much of Sly's family. Sly and Bentley realized this was now a heist and that it would take a skilled, specialist crew, more than the usual trio, and so they traveled around the world to assemble their team. First on the list was Murray. They couldn't go anywhere without their old buddy. When they found him, he was in the midst of a spiritual walkabout at the behest of a wise guru. They would ultimately recruit both Murray and the guru, followed by an incredibly skilled technician named Penelope, who Bentley would eventually strike up a relationship with. Next, against Sly's better judgment, they recruited the Fiendish Five's demolition expert, one of the people responsible for his father's death. Lastly, they called in a favor from Dimitri, the same criminal whose forgery racket they'd ruined some years earlier.
Carmelita chased them across the globe, but never caught up to them until they actually staged the heist on the Cooper Vault. She arrived just in time to save Sly's life during a battle with one of the creations of his dad's old partner. They were separated, and Sly infiltrated the vault, only to have his dad's old partner follow him inside. The two battled. The struggle was so fierce that the vault began to collapse. Eventually, Carmelita showed up and aided Sly in the fight. The fight ended when their enemy fired a shot at Carmelita, and Sly jumped in the way, taking the shot for her. Carmelita's response was to neutralize their assailant and leave him to die in the collapsing vault, while she attended to the wounded Sly. Seeing an opportunity, Sly feigned amnesia when he awoke, claiming to have no memory and leaving his thievery gear behind. Carmelita, seeing a chance to admit her feelings and set Sly on a, quote, better path at the same time, lied and told him that the two of them were partners at Interpol. They left the island together and struck up a solid romance, working together for an indeterminate period of time before the next game started, with only Bentley any the wiser to Sly's subterfuge.
During whatever nebulous time happened between the end of that game and the beginning of the next one, each of the Cooper gang started to do their own thing. Murray started racing, Sly and Carmelita lived and worked together, though Sly slowly started to feel that thieving itch go unscratched, and Bentley and Penelope worked together as well, inventing more and more technologies and growing closer. Bentley and Penelope eventually invented a time machine, though shortly afterwards, Penelope went missing. Suspiciously, not long after, pages from the Thieves Raccoonus, which was in Bentley's care, began to be unwritten, which Bentley deduced meant that time was being changed, events were being undone. He got the band back together, intent on using his time machine to travel back and fix things. They gave the book to Dimitri, here in the present, along with a special communication device that would let them speak across time, then went to work. They were able to fit the time machine into Murray's van, making it mobile, but it did have a limitation. The machine needed to have an item placed inside of it, and the machine could only go to the time period that item was created in. Since the first ancestor who was being unwritten was from ancient Japan, the Cooper gang stole an ancient Japanese knife from a museum, only to be caught by a heartbroken and furious Carmelita, who had suspected something suspicious from Sly but hadn't wanted to believe it. The gang escaped her and the guards by using the time machine to head to ancient Japan. After they escaped, Carmelita continued to investigate the museum in search of further clues, and accidentally stumbled across the plans of the very villain who'd orchestrated this whole time travel plot, Cyril Le Paradox, the owner of the museum.
Not unlike Clockwork, Paradox harbored resentment towards the Cooper family. He too came from a long line of thieves, though not as famous a clan as the Coopers. When Paradox was young, his father planned a heist, intending to frame Sly's father for the caper, only to have Sly's father pull a Uno reverse card, pulling off the heist before Paradox's father could and seeing him framed for it, earning Paradox's dad a life sentence. With no one to show him the criminal ropes and lacking the natural skill and fortunate friendship Sly made in a similar position, Paradox committed a string of uninspired crimes before being caught and imprisoned. But from within prison, Paradox began making connections, learning the ropes, and when he walked free, he started building his criminal empire, all while posing as a law-abiding art collector. Using his position and eventual assets like his museum to launder his illegal businesses, and doing so successfully that if he had just left Sly alone, he probably would have been fine. But no, despite the fact that his father's imprisonment likely led Paradox to a more lucrative and comfortable life than he would have had otherwise, Paradox swore vengeance on Cooper's family for his father's misfortune, vowing to erase the Coopers from the very annals of history. So, when Penelope and her time-traveling technology came along, he decided to do just that. Penelope believed that Bentley's genius was held back by his moral code, a code she believed had been instilled in him by Sly. So she agreed to aid Paradox in his plan to remove the Cooper's fame from history. Paradox planned to go back in time, steal each of the most notable Cooper's trademark canes, a visual calling card of the Cooper line, which in his mind would prove himself a greater thief than the Coopers and also erase their greatness from history, as well as use time travel to forge a royal lineage to his name so that he could grab great wealth and power in the present.
Carmelita walked in on Paradox in the midst of some of his more mundane smuggling and black market operations. However, since he was deploying lieutenants throughout history at the time, he sent Carmelita with one of them to be disposed of. After all, there are few better ways to make a body disappear than to ensure said body is no longer in your timeline. Unaware of this early on, Sly and the gang arrived in ancient Japan and assisted his ancient Japanese ancestor. Each time period they traveled to, Sly and his gang would end up saving his ancestor's life and helping them put a stop to the plans of Paradox's time-traveling lieutenants, but they always failed to regain his ancestor's stolen cane analogs. In Japan, they cleared his ancestor's name and defeated Paradox's lieutenant, then traveled to the American Old West using a badge one of Paradox's cronies left behind. There they would find and rescue Carmelita, who aided them because what else was she going to do when trapped in the wrong time period, though she and Sly had some serious issues to work out. They traveled back to the Stone Age in an emergency time jump to avoid falling off of a cliff to their deaths. There, Carmelita and Sly reconciled things and proceeded on more friendly terms. And afterward, they headed to medieval England, where they encountered Penelope, whom Bentley stepped up and defeated, proclaiming that his moral code was one of his own choosing, and that moreover it was right and he wouldn't be swayed. Lastly, they headed to ancient Arabia, defeating the last of Paradox's lieutenants, but were unable to stop him from forging papers of royal lineage or making off with the last of the Cooper canes.
Following Paradox to the present, they found he had incredible power and wealth at his disposal. Sly and Carmelita were stuck on Paradox's ship, so Bentley and Murray traveled back through time, bringing each of the ancient Coopers to aid in stopping Paradox's plans. Paradox's plans were foiled, Sly's ancestors were returned to their own time, and Sly and Carmelita had an interrupted final moment of understanding. However, during the final battle aboard Paradox's ship, his time machine had been damaged, rending a hole in space and time. Everyone escaped the ship except for Sly, who, along with the ship, was sucked through the rift to parts unknown. In the months and weeks that followed, Bentley, Murray, and Carmelita each spent time looking for Sly, hoping to find some clue as to the when of his whereabouts, but with little success. For his part, Sly awoke amidst the wreckage of the ship and the time machine in the middle of a desert near some pyramids. His exact location or time period, unknown.
And that's basically the story of Sly Cooper, titular hero of the Sly Cooper franchise. We hope you enjoyed this video, and, well, this is the last one, guys. This time next week, we'll release our goodbye video, but this is our last lore. We want to thank SLR409, Aurelia DePrimus, and Nakura for requesting this topic, because it was a lot of fun to research, and we also want to thank all of you for your lore requests. We really do hope you've enjoyed these videos. It might sound trite, but we do love you all, and you've made this a worthwhile experience. See you next week.
In the meantime, this has been
True Masters and Morons, signing off.